Ladies, gentlemen, non-binary and gender-fluid individuals, cyborgs, androids, interdimensional eldritch horrors, and the hundreds of millions of tardigrades that are slowly plotting to overthrow the governments of the world, welcome to the Crushing Deep. This YouTube channel is only a couple of weeks old, but I've been working on this game for a little while now, on and off. A little bit here, a little bit there, but with no clear direction. I was doing one thing that I found interesting, and then when it got tedious, moving on to something else, leaving lots of half-finished models and environments, and always the shadow of coding was looming. I was devouring video after video online to learn the skills I thought I would need, and usually leaving those half finished also and saving them to a playlist to come back when I needed them. YouTube's algorithm, in its infinite wisdom, picked up on this and suggested to me videos by a guy going by the name Unreal Robin, linked to his channel in the description below. Robin has taken on the monumental challenge of teaching himself Unreal and coding in C++, with the goal of being able to land a job in a AAA game studio after only 1 year of learning. His drive and ambition really inspired me to get organised and come up with a plan to stay on task and make steady, measurable progress. When I was a kid in the early 90s, another boy told me whilst walking home from school that making a game was easy. It was just a case of making a picture and telling the computer what to do with it. Now, being a cynical person, I immediately asked for confirmation of this from my father, a font of wisdom on all subject matters, and he confirmed this was essentially the case. I immediately fetched a pencil and a paper and scribbled out what, if I remember correctly, was a crude imitation of Roadrunner from Looney Tunes, and took it to my dad expecting him to somehow turn this into a game on our Amiga 500. 30 years later, I realised whilst it's not as simple as feeding a piece of paper with a drawing on it into the disk drive of a computer and saying out loud, "Make the bird run," the principle was correct. You create a visual representation of your game environment, the props and characters that populate that environment within the game's engine, and then you use code to instruct the behaviour of those characters, props and environments. The visual part is something I already have a handle on, and since that comes first, that's where I'll begin. And in order to make some sort of sense of what I should be working on at any given time, I'm going to create the visuals in the order that they are revealed in the game. But I can't know what I'll need unless I know how the game is going to unfold. Luckily, I have a fairly solid idea of how I want the story to progress already, but I am accounting for some flexibility in my plan as things evolve. As it stands, my plan is as follows. Step 1. Have a concept for a game. Step 2. Make and assemble the assets for the game. Step 3. Finalize the script for the story of the game. Step 4. Revisit any assets that need to be made or edited as a result of the finalizing of the script. Step 5. Code the gameplay and cutscenes using blueprints. Step 6. Sound design. Step 7. Optimization. Step 9. Alpha testing. Step 10. Making changes as per the feedback from alpha testing. Step 11. Beta testing. Step 12. Making changes as per feedback from beta testing. Step 13. Publish finished game. Well, step 1 of my plan is complete, but then it was before I started this channel, so I've moved on to step 2, making and assembling the assets in roughly the same order they will appear in the game. The first thing the player will see is the Crushing Deep animated logo sequence, which you saw at the start of this video, but I haven't actually finished working on that yet. I started it on a Friday evening a few weeks back and had the basic aspects of it in place that night and rendered it out over the weekend, only to find it looked nothing like I wanted. I went back and made little adjustments, and each time it took hours, if not days, to render out the finished sequence, only to discover something I hated about how it looked each time, and I would have to go back and adjust it again. This is one of the terrible downsides of 3D animation using traditional 3D modeling software. Unlike Unreal, where the results appear in real time, In Cinema 4D, the program I use for modelling and animation, what you see in the editor is only a crude approximation of the finished result, and you have to wait for the computer to calculate the path of all the photons to render out the final image, which, if you want all the bells and whistles of a really good quality image, can take a very long time, especially if you don't have the most high-spec PC. After 3 weeks of working on an animation I thought I had down in just a single evening, my patience was wearing thin and I lowered my standards in order to have the satisfaction of being finished. But knowing it could be better meant posting the video was not as satisfying as I thought it would be. 3 things bothered me. 1. The lighting on the fish seemed artificial as they drew near. 2. Up close it was very clear that the fish were a low quality model. 3. I used the fish to hide a wipe cut between one animation of the text formed out of bubbles and a second where the text was solid. The school of fish didn't move in the right way to cover this wipe, so I added one fish that was hand animated by me to cross the screen and cover the wipe. And although it moved from one side of the screen to the other, its body was static and it didn't look at all like it was swimming. So, to fix these issues, I lowered the intensity of the light shining on the fish. I added depth of field blur to the animation so that the fish would come out of focus as they moved closer to us. And finally, I rigged the fish with a virtual skeleton and put together a short animation of it swimming, which I then looped. The depth of field effect has really put my CPU to the test. The native renderer in Cinema 4D doesn't use my GPU, and as such I haven't finished rendering out the new version yet, but will show it to you as soon as it's done. Whilst waiting for that to be finished, I've got to work on the next thing to appear in the game, which will be the start menu. As my game is a film noir style detective story, how better to display the start menu than as files and documents scattered about our detective's office? So I've been working on building such an office setting. Now last time I misspoke. I said I wouldn't have to rely on existing assets created by a third party, and I realised too late that that made it sound as though I was going to be making everything from scratch. And although I could do that, it would take far too long, and I would be an old man before ever completing the game. What I should have said is that I won't be relying solely on existing assets from third parties. The majority of the airship in which the game is largely set will have been modelled from scratch by me, but there are at least 3 levels of gameplay before getting aboard the airship set in the city, and these settings will largely be populated by downloaded assets. I found a detective's office by an artist going by the name Quartermaster on a site called Desire FX, link in the description below, which I downloaded and tried to open in Unreal Engine, only to be met with a black screen. Something seems to have gone wrong either with my download or user error from my part trying to open the file, or perhaps at the source, but all the meshes were there in the content browser and all of the relevant textures, but none of the textures were applied to the materials and none of the mesh objects in the scene had an actual mesh present. As such, I began an arduous task of slowly trying to match the meshes in the content browser to the object in the scene, setting the placement, angle and size correctly, and then rebuilding the materials. As you can see here, the scene is slowly coming together, but it's not done yet. And even when it is, there will be some changes I need to make the scene that Quartermaster created fit my game. As promised last time, I'm going to pass on some tips and tricks I've learned to help you with your own journey in Unreal and or 3D modelling. Sometimes I suspect I'll have nothing to impart, and if I do, it will usually be something very specific that won't always be useful to you. But today I am starting with 2 very general pieces of advice. What you are looking at here is some of my workflow in Cinema 4D. Before I came up with the plan that I went over earlier, I started building a playable level using an asset set from Kitbash 3D, link in the description below. In the level, the player is required to walk from an exterior street into a theatre. Easy enough, except that the theatre asset has all of the doors as a single static mesh. Our player character has no way of opening these doors in their current form. He can either clip through them like a ghost or get locked outside. So, I could export the mesh from UE5 into Cinema 4D, but Kitbash 3D kits come in multiple file formats, so I just opened the C4D file for it and got to work isolating and separating out the doors in Cinema 4D. I love Cinema 4D. I find the layout very intuitive, I really love how easy it is to put together complex multi-layered materials, and it has hundreds of features, many of which I've barely begun to scratch the surface of, even after 2 decades. But my first piece of advice, if you are just starting out in 3D modeling and animation, don't buy it. Get Blender instead. Cinema 4D is hundreds of pounds or dollars or euros for its most basic version, and thousands if you want the studio version with all the bells and whistles. Blender is free to everyone. When I first started using Cinema 4D, it was release 6, and that was already several years out of date. It was a free copy on a CD-ROM stuck to the front of a PC magazine in either 2000 or 2001. Google tells me Blender has been around since 1994, but I didn't hear of its existence until years after I was already accustomed to Cinema 4D. And at that time, rightly or wrongly, I considered Blender to be inferior to Cinema 4D, as I assumed any free software must be, especially since Cinema 4D had at that time overtaken 3ds Max and Maya as the industry standard tool for 3D animation in filmmaking. That's now being replaced by Unreal Engine, and whilst Unreal is fantastic for quickly assembling lighting and animating a scene, it still has a long way to go before it's anywhere near the quality of other programs for 3D modeling, which is why I continue to work with Cinema 4D for making and editing 3D meshes. And whilst it's hugely inconvenient for me to abandon Cinema 4D to learn a whole new user interface in Blender, and there's no benefit in doing so since I already have Cinema 4D, one only needs to look at the work of someone like Ian Hubert, link in the description, to see that you can achieve incredible results in Blender, and these days there is little, if anything, that Cinema 4D can do that Blender can't. And as such, if you're just starting out, you might as well learn using the free software. My second piece of advice this week is to be wary of burnout. Whilst I am driven to make steady progress on this game and upload something here regularly, I will take a break when I need to, and you should too. You may see here me struggling over and over to fix a material error in the doors I am working on. As I indicated, they were made to be viewed only from the outside, so I had to rebuild the inside of the door and duplicate the whole object several times to fill in the rest of the doors. To rebuild the inside, I deleted the vertices on that side that made up only a portion of the handle, visible through the window, and then mirrored the polygons on the outside so that the inside was a mirrored image of the outside. As there were 3 sets of double doors, 3 of them had to face the opposite direction. So I took the first door, copied and pasted it as a new object, then took the size along the z-axis and set it to an equal negative value, which turned the whole thing the opposite way round, but then made one side of the door appear black when rendered, when the original was gold on both sides. I tried adjusting the material, I tried making a new material, I tried reversing the normals, which way the polygons face, and nothing I tried seemed to do the job. After nearly 45 minutes, it finally occurred to me that since 3 of the 6 doors looked perfect, and since I knew they were symmetrical along the z-axis because I myself had mirrored them, there was no reason I couldn't just rotate them 180 degrees, which I did, and the problem was solved. It was the most obvious solution, and it didn't occur to me because I was tired and tried to power through after a very long day, even though my brain was mush at that point. Take a break. Come back to your problems with a fresh perspective. That's it for now. Hope to talk to you again soon.